are psychopaths leading us? Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and recently one of you recommended that I take a look at an article with the curious title, The Need for Domination in Psychopathic Leadership. And I gotta say that this article poses some interesting thoughts for the frustrated military service member. To get started, the authors address the fact that psychopaths, people who are generally callous, unemotional, egocentric, and lacking in empathy for others, well, psychopaths seem to be concentrated in two populations: those who end up in prison and those who end up in leadership positions. In fact, the estimates are that as much as 4% of high-profile leadership positions are held by psychopaths, even though they only represent about 1% of the general population. The authors hypothesize that psychopaths end up in these leadership positions because they have a desire to control and dominate other people. In fact, the authors argue that there are basically three life motivations: a need for affiliation, a need for achievement, and a need for domination. And in the case of the psychopaths, the need for domination rules. But so what? What could this possibly mean for your military career? Well, some kind of mental model about how people behave, it's always handy. And despite what the recruiting videos will show you, or the nostalgia of veterans, you are going to run into people who are genuinely unpleasant. You're going to run into people who demonstrate those negative psychopathic traits like callousness and low empathy and grandiosity. You're going to see that interpersonal manipulativeness blended with some surprisingly positive characteristics. Things like charm and fearlessness and high executive function paired with some surprisingly strong self-control. And you might wonder, how did these people get here? And what the heck are they doing? Well, when I was first reading this paper, I was tempted to be dismissive because at the higher levels of military bureaucracy, I kind of feel like I didn't see as much as this particular personality disorder. But then I started thinking about some of the behaviors I had seen, and I thought, I don't know, maybe they have a point. First of all, they talked about what they called a dominance behavioral system, basically a continuum between submissiveness and dominance. And that system is an important aspect of all primate interactions, including human beings. And, depending on the circumstances, an individual has to be able to shift from being submissive to dominant and back to being submissive again. Obviously, the hierarchical nature of military organization, it provides an opportunity for dominance, but it also comes with a requirement for submission. In fact, that requirement for submission is pretty extreme at the beginning of someone's military career. So much so that a psychopath, hell-bent on dominance of others, they might not enjoy their early military experience. Failure to adapt, as they say. But more broadly, the military hierarchy means that there is always a bigger fish. A junior officer might think that by the time they make major or lieutenant colonel, they're going to be the big man, but it's just as likely that they're going to get shipped off to headquarters where they fetch coffee for bigger bosses. I bring this up because a junior officer who's using the military as a way to dominate others, they might tolerate paying their dues, but then become frustrated when they realize that they're never really permanently in charge. That might explain some of the majors who mysteriously get out of the military with 15 years of service. And, unfortunately, this may mean that long-suffering platoon sergeants and first sergeants have to deal with a parade of these characters before the system finally breaks them. The second point about these characters is that even when they're successful, they tend to harm their organizations. They cheat, manipulate, mistreat the staff, and even commit out-and-out white-collar crime. And a curious aspect of the U.S. military is how the upper-out system keeps individuals moving from one job to the next. That policy may mask the harm that an individual does. It gives an organization a chance to spin the roulette wheel and maybe get an individual who benefits the organization. And then finally, these researchers point out that so-called successful psychopathic leaders have a set of behaviors that, well, they might be useful in certain military situations. These include fearlessness and a reduced stress response. And even if they are certifiable SOBs, when you get to a certain level, everybody knows it, and the brass may use these particular individuals for certain no-win situations. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like I've seen more than one egomaniac tossed into some hopeless, career-killing catch-22 situation where they thought they were going to be the hero, only to serve as the sacrificial goat. Anyways, this is one of the reasons that you will hear the old-timers say, never trust first impressions. People who prioritize making good first impressions tend to also be the kind of people who rely on those good impressions long after their true colors have shown through.